Hashem, today's daf is Masechta Zevachim Daf Tzadik Gimel number 93, and we'll start from Tzadik Beis Amid Beis, like the last third of the Amid. Boy Rav Avin, Rav Avin asked the question. Now, basically, I mean, the topic that we're discussing over here, not in this question per se, but the overall topic of this Gemara's is this new concept called doing laundry. In other words, the Chumash says that a unique mitzvah saseh that only applies by a korban chatas, that whereas the blood of a korban chatas that sprays onto the clothing of the kohen, so then he has to do the laundry, special laundry in the Beis Hamikdash. He can't, send it to a dry cleaner. He has to do it in the Beis Hamikdash, and it's only if kosher blood that could have been sprinkled on the mizbeach gets onto his clothing, then and only then he has to wash his kohen. He has to wash his begadim. But let's say kohen blood from a disqualified korban gets on his clothing. We saw that yesterday that he doesn't have to wash his clothing. So here comes a question. Not related, but it leads up to what we're going to discuss. Boy Rabavin asked the question. Chatas oif, the bird chatas, right? The bird chatas, as you know, has to be sprinkled onto the mizbeach on the outside and the bottom of the mizbeach, right? You just do malika and then you squeeze the blood onto the mizbeach. But what happens? Shehiknis dama batzavara bifnim. You brought the blood into the sanctuary. As you know, as you can see in the picture, that it's supposed to be brought on the Mizbeach, and instead you brought it into the building where the Mizbeach HaPnimi is. So now, there is the psukim that we were discussing yesterday, and here it is the pasuk, as you can see on the screen, V'chol chatas asher yuva midam el oil moed. If you bring the blood of the chatas into the sanctuary, where it's not supposed to be there, for a chatas chitzarina, loy seachel, this chatas is disqualified, but sorev, you have to burn it. So a regular behema chatas means that you caught the blood into a kli shares, right? You caught the blood into a regular keli, and then instead of sprinkling, going to the mizbeach hachitzon, you walked into the sanctuary. And you walked into the sanctuary, and you did a service there. Here, a chatas oif by a bird chatas that you brought the blood without, you just chopped off its neck. You did a malika, and now you brought the blood bifnim. Mahu, does this chatas oif become possible? Why? Tzavara kechli sharis dami. Its neck. Since a bird chatas never gets poured into a kli shares, there's no such a thing, you're pouring it into a cup. So the neck itself is like a cup, ubifsol, and this will disqualify the chatas oif if you bring it inside the sanctuary. Oidilmo maybe kitzavar behema, like the neck of an animal. Midama marachbana v'lebisora. An animal, if you slaughter an animal and just bring the animal into the sanctuary, it doesn't become possible. Because the Torah says only if you bring the blood by itself does it become possible, not if you bring the blood with the animal. So therefore, if you bring the bird with its body into the sanctuary, so it would not become possible. So what's the question? The question is the neck like a kli shares? So Tashma, come in here. Pirkasa, if you shechted a bird and it jumped around, the nichnas alefnim, it went inside the sanctuary, v'chazra, and came back outside the sanctuary, kshera, it's kosher. Ha hechnisa, but that implies if you actually brought the bird inside the Beis Hamikdash, inside the sanctuary by yourself, psula, it would be pasul. So we see clearly, from a diuk, that if you actually do malika and then bring the bird inside the sanctuary, it will disqualify the bird. And says the Gemara, according to your reasoning, are you correct? By a regular kachim animal, the Ketani, it says, Pirka, so you slaughtered the animal, it jumped around, from the north, V'yatzla Dharma went to the south side of the Beis Hamikdash. As you can see on the picture, let's say it went from the north, which is where you're supposed to slaughter, and it went to the south. South is down towards the ramp of the Mizbeach. It jumped around. So what's the din? The din is it comes back kashera. Ha'itzia, but if you carried it, would you be medayik that if you carried it to the south side of the Beis Hamikdash psula, it would be puzzle? That's ridiculous because the whole area is kosher for the animal. You're supposed to slaughter it in the north, but if you carry it to the south, why would it puzzle the animal? Elahai, what that means to say is yatzasa l'chutz itzrachalei. That means if it went out on the outside of the Beis Hamikdash, that's the diak. That if the animal jumped around, went to the south, then it's kosher. But if it went outside the Beis Hamikdash and then came back, then it's pasol. So that's the diak. Hachinami, same thing over here. Yatzasa l'chutz itzrachalei. That if the bird goes inside the sanctuary and then comes back, even if you brought it into the sanctuary and it comes back and you bring it back, it should be kosher. But if it goes outside the Beis Hamikdash, only then is it possible. So again, the Gemara had a question, and the Gemara just doesn't resolve it. The question is a bird chatas that you took the blood and right away after you did the malika, instead of going to the outside Beis Hamikdash, you went into the sanctuary. Does it disqualify or the bird or not? The Gemara leaves that unresolved. Another question. Boya Rabavin asked the question. Nishbach al haritzpa. Now we know that if you shecht an animal and the blood spills on the floor, you cannot pick it up and use it as a sprinkling blood, because you're supposed to catch it in a klishares, in a vessel. You're supposed to catch it. What happens? A bird chatas, the blood spills on the floor. What a bird, you're never supposed to catch in a klishares. So what's so if you picked it up off the floor, does it passel? Boy Rabbavan said, ask the question. Nishbach ala ritzba v'asafa. A bird chatas that the blood spilled on the floor, and you gathered it up. Mahu. What's the din? The Torah never required you to catch the blood in a vessel. The hilkach, therefore, if it falls on the floor, no problem. Oisva, you gather it up. Bekasher, it'll be kosher. So the blood fell on the floor by the bird. You pick it up and you can sprinkle it on the mizbeach. Oidilmor, maybe mifsal pasal beirachmana klisharis. The Torah, if you actually catch the blood of the bird in a klishares, in a keli, you disqualified the bird. And v'hilkach, the Gemara is not sure about that. V'hilkach, and therefore, oisva, if it falls on the floor, it also upasal, it would become pasal. Rava said, let's try to resolve that. We said before that the Gemara said, we learned this yesterday, Toshma, Yochol Yehei Dam Chatas Oif Ton Kibus. I would have thought that the blood of a Chatas Oif, of a bird Chatas, that falls on a kohen's clothing, I might think you need to wash it. Talmud Loimer Zois, only animal Chatas's blood that fall on the clothing of a kohen you wash, but not the bird Chatas. If you're going to think that if blood falls onto if the blood of a chatas oaf would fall into a keli, it would become puzzle, right? It would be disqualified. So therefore, the fact that it would come near into the airspace of, let's say, this sweater or whatever this item belonging to the kohen, as soon as it comes into the airspace, let's say it comes into the airspace of his sleeve, it would become puzzle, because the clothing is like a keli, and even prior to it landing, it's pasula blood, and once pasula blood lands on the clothing, you don't have to wash it. So so of course you don't have to wash bird chatas blood from the clothing of the kohen, because it became puzzle even before it touched the clothing of the kohen, because it came puzzle because it came into the ear space of the clothing of the kohen, and therefore it's puzzle because as soon as it goes into a klisharis, it's puzzle, and therefore if it lands, we know puzzle blood does not have to be washed. So why do I need this pasuk zois to exclude the blood of a chatas oif? We're talking about that that you flatten. Let's say you flatten the clothing of the kohen. It was flat, and the neck of the bird came directly onto the clothing of the kohen without going into its ear space, and that's what I need zois to exclude. That even then, since it didn't become puzzle until it actually touched the clothing, but still it was kosher prior to it hitting the clothing. Because of that, therefore, I would think it needs washing. That's why you need the pasuk zois to tell you it doesn't need washing. But again, this doesn't answer our question. What happens if the blood of a chatas oif falls onto the floor and you gather it up? Can you sprinkle it on the mizbeach? The Gemara asks another question. Boy minei Levi. Levi asked the question, I guess, from Rebbe. Nitaz mibeged lebeged mahu. Let's say if the blood bounced from one item, from one clothing, from let's say the clothing of one kohen to the clothing of another kohen. Maho, what's the din of the second kohen? Does he need to wash his clothing? Mibeged kama it. As soon as it landed on the first beged, he was supposed to wash it. So therefore, it was puzzle. So therefore, when it landed on the second beged, it's puzzle the blood that's landing on the second beged. Oy dilma loy, or maybe not. Maybe we don't say such a svara, and we say that even if it lands on the second beged, you would still have to wash it. Amalei. So Rebbe answered, Levi zu shela. That is a very good question, but I think, says Rebbe, toin kibbutz b'manavshach. No matter what, it's obviously has to be washed because if you held that if it falls onto the floor, or right, or it falls into a klisharis, it's kosher. Ha kosher, it's kosher because even if it touched the first bagged, that doesn't passel really the blood, because maybe the blood will not become puzzle. There's a chiyuv to wash it, but doesn't become puzzle, and therefore, if it goes from the first bagged to the second bagged, you would have to wash it because it's still kosher sprinkling blood. The isoi puzzle, even if you want to say that it became post puzzle by touching the first bagged, then, but still, you would still have to wash it. Because Anoach Rabbi Akiva, there is an outlier opinion of Rabbi Akiva that even puzzle blood, if the blood at one time was kosher to be sprinkled and it became puzzle later on, you would still require to wash it out of the clothing of the kohen. So who cares if it was puzzle when it touched the first bagged and landed on the second bagged? According to Rabbi Akiva, you would still have to wash it. The Amma, Rabbi Akiva says, even if it's hoisoloi shasha kosher v'nefsala, if the blood had a momentary time that it was kosher and it became disqualified, daman tan kibbutz, then the blood still needs to be washed. We go to the Amid Aleph, and we're just going to do the first three lines, then we're going to go to the Mishnah. Okay. The Mishnah, the Boimene Rami Bachoma Rav Chizda. Rami Bachoma asked a question from Rav Chizda. Nitas al beged tame maho. Let us say that the blood fell onto a tame beged. That automatically, as soon as it touches the beged of this kohen, and the beged of the kohen, the clothing of the kohen was tame, it made the blood tame. So do you have to wash out that blood? Is there a mitzvah? Since you asked me that question, Shmamino, you see from there, if it at one time it was kosher and then it became pasul, ain dama tam and kibbutz. The blood doesn't need kibbutz. So as soon as it becomes pasul, the blood doesn't need a washing. So therefore, if it became puzzle, you wouldn't need washing. So therefore, this is pus blood. But the question over here is, Hanimili, maybe it doesn't need kibus b'zeh. It first became puzzle and then touched the beged. So then you would say you don't need to wash the beged because it first became puzzle and then it touched the beged. Aval bavas achas, but maybe when it became puzzle at the same time it touched the beged because it touched the beged tame, maybe loy, you wouldn't say such a concept, and you would say it would need to be washed. Or dilma loishno, you'll say doesn't matter. It's puzzle blood. It doesn't need to be washed. And the Gemara tries to say that according to Abaya, this is a machlekes between Reb Lezer and the Rabbanim. Now, let us go to the Mishnah. Okay, now the Mishnah said like this: Nitaz min hatzavar al habeged. If it if it fell from the neck onto the clothing, ein toin kibus. Here it is. It fell from the neck of the animal onto a clothing. The guy, the kohen shechted the animal. The kohen shechted the animal, and then he didn't catch the blood. It just fell right onto his clothing. Ein a toin kibus. You don't have to wash it. Why? Because this kind of blood, if it never entered into a cup, you can't sprinkle it. So that unkosher sprinkling blood is not required to be washed out of the clothing of the kohen. Min hakeren umin hayesoid. If you already sprinkled the blood onto the wall of the let's say here, this picture, you see the kohen, he already sprinkled the blood onto the corner of the mizbeach. Let's say if that blood, after he sprinkled it, landed on his clothing, he doesn't have to wash his clothing. And even the extra blood that he's going to pour down the yasoid, also that if it lands now on his clothing, you don't have to wash your clothing. Why? Because you already did the mitzvah. It's only blood that's kosher to be sprinkled that you have not yet done the mitzvah. That blood that spills on your clothing, that has a chiyuv to be washed. Again, ein etoin kibbus. Nishbach al ritzba. Let's say blood spilled on the floor. Ba'asafoi. And you picked it up. Ein toin kibbus. You don't have to wash it. Because once you shecht an animal and the blood falls on the floor, you can't use that blood as sprinkling blood. So if that blood ended up on the clothing, the kohen does not have to wash it. Because ein toin kibbus, the only time you need to wash your clothing, again, this is a funny type of mitzvah. It's a mitzvah dairaisa of doing laundry. You could ask somebody. The mitzvah of deraisa of doing laundry is only if only if it's blood that you caught in a vessel, and that blood is kosher that you can sprinkle it on the mizbeach. If that falls on the kohen's clothing, he has to wash it. Tani Rabbana, rabbis taught, Yochel nitas min atzavar ala beged yehi ton kibos. I would have thought that if it falls from the neck of the animal without going into a keli, you would have to wash the clothing. Talmud loima ashayiza lo yamarti lecha ela barou lahazoi. Only if it's something that you could sprinkle, and once it fell from the neck and didn't go into a keli, you can sprinkle it onto the mizbeach. Talmud yeidach yochal nita min akeren min yisoid yeitoyin kibos. I would have thought that if the blood, you did the mitzvah already of sprinkling, and that blood ended up on your clothing, you have to wash them. Talmud loy masha yiza prat lezeh shekvar huza. That excludes this was sprinkled already, and the only time is that the only blood that you need to wash from your clothing if it's blood that you're going to sprinkle. Nishbach al ritzba. If the blood fell on the floor, we go to Amid Beis. Hatu lameli. What do you need this extra case? Ma'atam kamar. The Gemara, the Mishnah is just giving you a reason. What's the reason why, if it falls on the floor and you gather it up into a keli, and that blood falls on your clothing, you don't have to wash it because that's non-kosher blood for sprinkling. You don't have to wash the clothing. Only blood that you caught in a vessel. V'roi lahazoy, and you could technically use that blood to sprinkle it onto the mizbeach. If that blood ends up in your clothing, then you have to wash it out. Other than that, you don't have to wash out. Roi lahazoy. We said in the Mishnah that it has to be a type of blood that it's appropriate, that it had the amount to ready to be sprayed on the mizbeach. Lamute mai. What is this excluding? Lamute, it's excluding a guy did something like this. Kibol pachas mikdei hazor b'chlizeh upachas mikdei hazor b'chlizeh. A person, he shechted an animal, and let's say he caught in a keli a quarter of an ounce of blood in one, and a quarter of an ounce of blood in another cup. So he never had the shear of sprinkling, and then he mixed them together. So now he has the shear. Technically, this is not kosher blood to be sprinkled on the mizbeach because they were not all caught in one cup. The Tanya, how do you know that there's such a concept? The Tanya, we learned in a Braisa, Rab Chalafta Bar Shaul Omer, Rab Chalafta says, the same thing by Kiddush of the ashes with the water, Kiddush Pachas Mikdei Azor B'Klizeh, Pachas Mikdei Azor B'Klizeh. If you put a drop of ash and a drop of water in one cup, and a drop of ash and a drop of water in another cup, and then put the cups together, Loi Kiddush, that's not Mechatas, because you did it too small. You have to have a shear of water and ashes in one cup. So same idea. What would be if you caught the blood in two small cups, two tiny cups? You caught the blood. Hilkasa, is this halacha strictly by efer para and not we're not going to apply it by dam or mihilkasa loy gamrinen? We don't learn halacha mishasim. Maybe this was only said by paraduma waters, but efer para, but not said by sprinkling blood. Oidilma, or maybe hasa maitama. What's the reason why when you first catch the blood, you have to have enough blood in the cup to do a proper sprinkling? Because of the ksiv by it said by para aduma v'tavo b'mayim. In other words, I'm sorry, by efa para, you have to have enough water in the cup in order to put the ashes. Not that you have like a drop of water and you put a drop of ash. It has to be a lot of water, and then you put the ashes in, because there has to be a significant amount of water. Hachanami, also over here, we're going to apply the same thing. Ksiv, the pasuk says, v'tava badam, you have to dip your finger in a cup that caught enough blood that you could do the sprinkling. So is it true or not? Tashma, come in here. The Amar Rab Zrika, Amar Rab Loza, Apadam loy kiddush. If you do it that way, if you do it with two small cups, it's not going to be holy. So let's review. Review is like this, that blood has to be kosher blood. So if you catch the blood in a cup and that blood falls on your clothing, you have to wash the clothing. What happens if I caught a drop, an ounce of blood, and then caught another ounce of blood in a different cup? Now that each ounce is not a shear, but if I mix them together, maybe I'll have a shear. If I mix them together, so is that kosher for sprinkling on the mizbeach? And the answer is not. The only way you're going to have kosher blood, sprinkling blood, is if you catch enough blood the first time when it oozes out of the animal. You have a nice big cup and you catch enough blood. But if you catch just a little bit, that's not going to be kosher blood, and therefore, if that non-kosher blood falls on on the kohen's clothing, he does not need to wash it. Amar Rava, We'll start a little bit over here, and then we'll stop. Another minute. Amar Rava. Rava said, Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, the Toval, when the kohen sprinkles the blood on the mizbeach, as you saw in the picture, he sprinkles the blood on the mizbeach, right? But he has to dip his finger into the blood. So what do you learn from that? V'loi, he has to drink. V'loi misapeg. He's not allowed to, stick his finger on the outside of the cup, but he has to stick his finger inside the cup. Badam, What does it mean? The cup has blood in it. The blood there has to be enough blood in that cup that you have a she'ir of dipping. Let's call it 3 ounces. Or min hadam, min adam shebe'inyu. We don't know what that means. The Gemara is going to explain that in a minute. If the Torah would say that you need a lot of blood, I would think I would think if the Torah just wrote v'taval, it means that even if you did not have catch enough blood the first time, you just kept adding blood from different cups, it would still be kosher. That's why the Torah wrote badam. That an only way to make it kosher is if you caught enough blood the first time. The kasav rachmana badam. If the Torah just made sure that there's enough blood in the cup, I would think you don't need to stick your finger into the cup. Just sticking your finger on the side of the cup, that should be enough. Concludes the Gemara. Min hadam shabi inyan lemute mai. What is that coming to exclude? Amarava lemute shiraim shabi etzba. That if you have leftover blood on your finger, right? You can't say, okay, I'm not going to stick my finger into the blood. I'll just go to the next corner and give a spritz like that. That's also no good. Not only you can't get blood from the side of the cup, but you can't use the extra blood that's on the finger. And that's how the Gemara concludes. Beside Rab Loza, the Amar Rab Loza Shirayim Shebe Etzba Pesulim. The leftover blood on your finger is considered pasal. Okay. We'll continue Be'ez Hashem tomorrow.
Thank you.
So the Gemara concludes. Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav Amram, Amar Ravin, Barada, Rav Adel, Rav Amatamidach, Amar Rav Amram. Rav Amram said, Tanina, Ha Yamaza Benitza Azah Miyade. A person was sprinkling, and the blood got off his hand. Actually, he's Tan Kibus. Before he sprinkled, it needs washing. If it falls on the clothing, you need to wash the clothing. After you sprinkle the clothes, after you sprinkled, ain't time kibus, you don't need to wash your clothing. My love hachikama. Achloy gamal lahazois time kibus. As long as you didn't finish sprinkling, you need to wash your clothing. But when you finish going around the 4 corners, ain't time kibus, you don't need to wash. So the question is, it seems that you don't need to dip your finger every time into the cup. As long as you finish, you could still continue. There's still everything that's still on your finger could still be kosher to sprinkle. And says the Gemara, loy hachikama. This is what he meant to say. As soon as the first when you dipped, the hazah didn't leave your hand, toin kibbutz. But once the blood left your hand, ain't toin kibbutz, then the rest of the blood that's still on your finger doesn't need to be washed, because that's not kosher lahazah. You have to re-dip your finger into the cup. Eisvei Abaya says, when you finish sprinkling, the Brisa says, mekanech yade begufa shel para. He wiped his hand into the body of the paraduma. When he sprinkled the blood of the paraduma towards the base of Mikdash. Now, Gomar in, when he finishes, yes, loy Gomar, loy. Then as long as he didn't finish, he doesn't wipe his finger anymore. He just continue with the finger. So we see you don't need to dip yourself 7 times. You don't need to dip 7 times. If you finish the last one, loy Gomar, but when you didn't finish, you still have to wipe your finger to re-dip again. So wait a second. So therefore, the Torah requires when you finish the final sprinkling, then you wipe your hands in the body of the para aduma. Ella etzboy, when you finish just one sprinkle, but my mekaneach, what are you going to dry your hands? If you're not doing it on the body of the para, where are you going to dry your hands? Where you can dry your finger. Amar Abaya, Misvas Mizrak, Diksiv, Ki Parizov. At the edge of the vessel, you dry your finger, and then you dip in again. But when you finish the final sprinkling, then you wipe your hands totally on the body of the paraduma. So ends Daf Tzadik Gimel.